How did 500 knights fight against 40,000 Ottomans for 4 months? This story may seem like fiction, but it is reality. In May 1565, the Ottoman Empire, at the height of its power, sent an armada of nearly 200 ships to capture a tiny island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. 40,000 elite warriors, including the legendary Janissaries, were supposed to crush a garrison consisting of only 500 knights and several thousand soldiers. It was a battle not for stone and land, but for control of the entire sea, a clash of two worlds. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent had no doubt that victory would be swift, for his army had already conquered vast territories. But he did not take one thing into account. The defenders were led by the 70-year-old Grand Master Jean Parisot de la Valette, a man whose will was stronger than the fortress walls of his island. This siege turned into a 4-month nightmare that became legendary. Watch the video to the end to find out how a handful of defenders managed to withstand the greatest military machine of their time, and why the outcome of this battle forever changed the balance of power in Europe. What if I told you that one of the most decisive battles in history was determined not by cannons, but by the arrogance of one ruler and the unyielding will of another? By 1565, the Ottoman Empire had reached the zenith of its power under the rule of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. His dominions stretched from Hungary to the Persian Gulf, and he considered the Mediterranean Sea his own private lake. The only thorn in this otherwise perfect canvas of power was the Order of Hospitallers, or Knights of Malta. These monk knights, expelled by Suleiman from the island of Rhodes decades earlier, had settled in Malta. From there, they continued their struggle, carrying out daring raids on Ottoman ships. For Suleiman, this was not just a military issue, but a personal one. He could not accept the existence of this rebellious stronghold in the heart of his domain. Therefore, he assembled one of the greatest armadas the world had ever seen to wipe the order off the face of the earth once and for all. At the head of Malta's defenders was Grand Master Jean de la Valette. He was 70 years old and had spent most of his life fighting the Ottomans. He knew his enemy like no one else, his tactics, his strengths, and most importantly, his weaknesses. La Valette understood that Malta was not just an island, but the key to the entire Mediterranean. If Malta fell, Sicily would be next, and then Italy itself. He turned the island into a single fortress, preparing for a siege that many considered hopeless. He gathered all the knights, mercenaries, and local militias, addressing them with a simple speech. He promised them neither glory nor wealth, but only hard work and an honorable fate. His confidence and iron will inspired the defenders to stand firm until the end. The confrontation was not just a clash of armies. It was a duel between two great leaders of their time. Suleiman, accustomed to victory and intolerant of dissent, and Valletta, for whom this battle was the work of his life. The Ottoman commanders, Lala Mustafa Pasha and Admiral Piale Pasha, were confident of a quick victory. They looked down on the tiny island from the height of their numerical superiority. It was this confidence that became their first and foremost mistake. They underestimated not only the strength of the Maltese walls, but also the strength of spirit of those who stood behind them. The defenders were preparing not just for battle, but to become the last bastion in the path of the Ottoman advance. What do you think is more important in war? Numerical superiority or the strength of a leader's spirit? Share your opinion in the comments. Want to know the secret that turned barren rock into an impregnable fortress? Malta did not have rich natural resources, but its geography was ideal for defense. At the heart of the defense was the Grand Harbor, protected by 3 powerful forts: St. Angelo, Saint Michel, and St. Elmo. Fort St. Angelo, the residence of the Grand Master, was the oldest and most powerful fortification. Located at the tip of the Birgu Peninsula, it controlled the entrance to the harbor. Its walls were built using the latest advances in fortification and could withstand the fire of the most powerful artillery. On the neighboring peninsula, Senglea, was Fort Saint Michel. Together with Birgu, it created deadly crossfire for any fleet that attempted to enter the harbor. These 2 bastions were the defenders' main hope. Fort St. Elmo stood apart, located at the tip of the Skybrus Peninsula, right at the entrance to the harbor. It was smaller and more vulnerable than the other two forts. Its task was to withstand the first blow and buy time for the main defenses to be prepared. Valletta understood that it was impossible to hold the island in open terrain. Therefore, he concentrated all his forces on defending the fortifications around the Grand Harbor. Each fort was carefully prepared and supplied with food, water, and ammunition. The garrison consisted of a motley crew. The corps was made up of about 500 knights of the order, experienced warriors for whom war was the meaning of life. They were assisted by several thousand Spanish and Italian mercenaries, as well as Maltese militiamen defending their homes and families. The total number of defenders did not exceed 9,000. They were opposed by a 40,000-strong Ottoman army consisting of the empire's best soldiers. The ratio of forces was approximately 1-5, not counting the huge Ottoman fleet. Valletta personally inspected all the fortifications, checking every detail. He knew that in the upcoming siege there would be no small details. Any weakness in the defense could be fatal. He also organized a clear chain of command. Each sector of the defense was entrusted to an experienced knight who bore full responsibility for it. Discipline and order were as important elements of the defense as the thickness of the walls. The Ottoman armada had a huge numerical and technical advantage, but the knights had a secret weapon that the Turks could not foresee. Ready to find out why the Ottoman command made a fatal mistake before the first shot was fired? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Ottoman army. Its main weakness lay not in its weapons, but in the minds of its commanders. Suleiman the Magnificent, already in his twilight years, did not lead the campaign himself. Instead, he appointed two commanders whose rivalry became one of the main allies of Malta's defenders. The land forces were commanded by Lala Mustafa Pasha. He was an experienced but extremely vain and impatient commander. He craved glory and sought to capture the island as quickly as possible to earn the Sultan's praise. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Piale Pasha. Unlike Mustafa, he was a cautious and methodical strategist. His main task was to preserve the fleet, and he did not want to risk his ships unless absolutely necessary. From the outset, there were disagreements between the two commanders. Mustafa demanded an immediate landing and assault, while Piale insisted on thorough reconnaissance and a blockade of the harbors. Their constant arguments led to a loss of precious time. Suleiman, anticipating possible friction, appointed a third man to be the supreme commander. This was Turgut Reis, known in Europe as Dragut, a legendary corsair and one of the most talented naval commanders of his time. He knew Malta and the Knights better than anyone. However, Dragut had not yet arrived when the Ottoman army landed. His fleet was delayed, and Mustafa, unwilling to share the glory, decided to begin the operation on his own. This decision had disastrous consequences for the entire campaign. Upon arriving on the island, Mustafa Pasha, contrary to logic and the advice of more experienced officers, decided to attack Fort St. Elmo first. He believed that this small fortress would fall in a few days. He wanted to present Dragut with a ready-made victory. Piale Pasha was against this plan. He understood that as long as St. Elmo held out, his fleet would not be able to enter the safe harbor of Marsa-Mouchet. But under pressure from Mustafa, he was forced to agree and began unloading heavy artillery. Thus, even before the siege began, discord and disunity reigned in the Ottoman camp. The commanders pursued personal goals rather than a common strategy. This internal struggle for power and glory gave the defenders of Malta an invaluable gift: time. When Dragut finally arrived in Malta, he was furious. He saw that the army had become embroiled in a protracted siege of a minor fort instead of attacking the main fortifications. But it was too late to change anything, and he was forced to lead the siege of St. Elmo, knowing full well how flawed the original plan was. Guess what happened next when 40,000 soldiers attacked a fort defended by only a few hundred men? The Ottoman army landed in Malta on May 19th and immediately began the siege of Fort St. Elmo. Huge siege guns, capable of firing stone cannonballs weighing hundreds of kilograms, began a methodical bombardment. The defenders of the fort, who numbered no more than 600, knew they were doomed. Their task was to hold out as long as possible to give the main forces time to strengthen the defenses of Birgu and Senglea. They became a living shield, taking the full force of the Ottoman attack. Mustafa Pasha was confident that the fort would fall in 3 or 4 days. However, week after week passed, and St. Elmo continued to resist. At night, under cover of darkness, the defenders repaired the destroyed walls, and during the day they repelled one assault after another. Every meter of land came at a huge cost to the Ottomans. The knights and soldiers fought with the desperation of the doomed, using every stone and every crack in the wall for defense. Their tenacity infuriated the Ottoman commanders. Upon arriving at the scene, Dragut immediately took command. He realized that taking the fort head-on would be too costly. He ordered additional batteries to be set up to fire at the walls from several directions at once. Under his leadership, the siege became more systematic and brutal. The bombardment continued day and night. The walls of the fort were reduced to ruins, but every time the Janissaries launched an assault, they were met with heavy fire from the defenders. Every night, Valletta sent reinforcements and food to St. Elmo and took the wounded away by boat across the Great Harbor. This was the thin thread that connected the fort with the main forces. When the Ottomans managed to cut off this route, the fate of St. Elmo was sealed. After a month of continuous fighting, almost nothing remained of the garrison. The last defenders gathered in a ruined chapel, preferring to die in battle rather than surrender. On June 23rd, Fort St. Elmo fell. The victory came at a high price for the Ottomans. They lost several thousand of their best soldiers, including Dragut himself, who was mortally wounded. The small fort, which they had planned to take in a few days, held out for more than a month. The fall of St. Elmo was a heavy blow to the defenders, but the main fort still held. In the next chapter, you will learn how the knights and inhabitants of Malta withstood the most intense bombardment of the 16th century. After capturing St. Elmo, the Ottoman army shifted its attack to the main bastions, the Birgu and Singlea peninsulas. Mustafa Pasha, enraged by the delay and losses, decided to crush the defenders with massive attacks. The most difficult stage of the siege began, turning into a methodical extermination on both sides. Dozens of heavy siege guns were brought into position around the forts. A relentless bombardment began, lasting for weeks. The earth shook from the roar, and the air was filled with dust and smoke. The walls of the forts, which had seemed impregnable, began to crumble under a hail of stone cannonballs. During the day, the cannons created breaches, and at night, the defenders tried to repair them under the cover of darkness. It was exhausting work under the constant threat of shelling. Life in the besieged cities turned into hell. The civilian population, including women and the elderly, took an active part in the defense. They carried stones and water to the walls, cared for the wounded, and helped extinguish fires. Water and food became as valuable as gold. Supplies were strictly rationed, and each resident received a minimal ration. Despite the hardships, the spirit of the defenders was not broken, largely thanks to the personal example set by Grand Master Valletta. The 70-year-old master was everywhere. He personally commanded the defense in the most dangerous areas, appeared on the ruined walls, and inspired the fighters with his calmness and confidence. He shared all the hardships of the siege with them, proving that he was not just a commander, but one of them. The Ottomans used all the siege technologies known at the time. They dug tunnels to lay mines under the walls, built huge siege towers, and tried to ferry troops across the harbor in boats. Each of their tricks was met with countermeasures by the defenders. The knights, in turn, responded with daring sorties. Small detachments crept into the Ottoman camp under cover of night, causing confusion and destroying siege weapons. This war of attrition drained the strength of both sides. The psychological pressure was enormous. The constant roar of cannons, lack of sleep and food, and the sight of destruction all took their toll on the nerves. But the defenders understood that they had nowhere to retreat, and this gave them strength. The siege turned into a contest of endurance. The Ottomans tried to break the defenders with their numerical superiority and artillery. The knights responded with tenacity, engineering ingenuity, and an unyielding will to win. Ready to learn the shocking truth about the turning point of the siege? By midsummer, Mustafa Pasha realized that bombardment alone would not bring victory. He decided to launch a series of general assaults to crush the resistance in one fell swoop. In July and August, the Ottoman army launched several massive attacks on the breaches in the walls of Birgu and Singlea. Tens of thousands of soldiers stormed the walls simultaneously. It seemed that this human wave would simply sweep away the few defenders. The battle for the breaches in the walls was incredibly fierce. The defenders used everything they could to stop the attackers. They poured boiling tar on the heads of the attackers and dropped heavy stones on them. The knights developed a special weapon that terrified the Ottomans: Greek fire. These were clay pots filled with a combustible mixture that were set on fire and thrown into the thick of the attackers. This simple but effective weapon caused enormous damage. At one of the most critical moments, when the Janissaries had almost broken through into the city, Jean de la Valette himself appeared on the wall. Despite his age, he personally led the counterattack. His appearance inspired the defenders, and they were able to repel the enemy. The Ottomans also launched a large-scale attack from the sea. Dozens of boats with troops attempted to land on the Senglea Peninsula. However, they came under deadly fire from a hidden battery that the knights had prudently installed at the foot of Fort San Angelo. Each assault ended in failure and huge losses for the Ottomans. Mountains of bodies littered the approaches to the walls. Morale in the Ottoman camp began to decline, while each repelled attack gave the defenders confidence. The failure of the decisive assaults was a psychological turning point in the siege. Mustafa Pasha saw his elite army melting away in fruitless attacks. He became increasingly irritable and made hasty decisions. The defenders, despite their fatigue and losses, felt that victory was possible. They saw fear and uncertainty in the eyes of their enemies. They continued to hold their positions, ready for new challenges. The Ottomans were exhausted and demoralized, but they still had one last card to play. In the next chapter, we will see how a surprise attack on the rear nearly ended the siege. After the failure of the general assaults, Mustafa Pasha found himself in a desperate situation. The siege was dragging on, the losses were enormous, and discontent was brewing in the army. He urgently needed at least some kind of victory to boost morale, and he decided on a risky venture. He decided to strike at the ancient capital of Malta, the city of Medina, located in the center of the island. Medina was poorly fortified, and its garrison consisted of only a few dozen soldiers and militiamen. Mustafa hoped to easily capture the city, plunder it, and thereby demoralize the defenders of the harbor. The elderly governor, Don Mesquita, commanded the defense of Medina. Upon learning of the approach of the Ottoman troops, he did not panic. Instead, he employed a brilliant military ruse worthy of the pages of textbooks. He ordered all the inhabitants of the city to be armed, including peasants from the surrounding villages who had found refuge behind the walls. He dressed them in military uniforms and placed them on the walls to create the appearance of a large garrison. He wanted to deceive Ottoman intelligence. Moreover, Don Mesquita ordered his small artillery to fire continuously but randomly. The roar of the cannons was supposed to convince the Ottomans that the city was preparing for a long and serious defense. It was pure bluff, designed to have a psychological effect. When the Ottoman detachment approached Medina, its commander was struck by what he saw. Instead of a quiet and defenseless city, he saw walls dotted with soldiers and heard the roar of numerous cannons. Intelligence reported that the garrison of Medina was much larger than expected. The Ottoman commander, not wanting to get involved in another protracted siege, did not decide to storm the city. He considered the risk too great. After a brief consultation, the detachment turned back to the main camp without firing a single shot. Don Mesquita's ruse worked perfectly. He saved the city and its inhabitants without a single casualty. This bloodless victory had enormous moral significance for all the defenders of Malta. The failure of the attack on Medina was the last straw for the Ottoman army. The soldiers' spirits were finally broken. They realized that they could not win on this cursed island. Mustafa Pasha was furious, but there was nothing he could do. His army was physically and morally exhausted. The time he had wasted so ineptly at the beginning of the siege was now working against him. By the end of August, the Ottoman camp was a depressing sight. 4 months of siege, the scorching Mediterranean sun, and constant failures had taken their toll. The fighting spirit of the army, once considered invincible, was broken. Disease began to spread through the camp. A lack of clean water and poor hygiene led to outbreaks of dysentery. Disease took out more soldiers than the battles at the fortress walls. Food and gunpowder supplies were running low. The fleet, anchored in the open sea, was constantly at risk from autumn storms. Admiral Piale Pasha insisted more and more on ending the siege and returning home. The most demoralized were the Janissaries, the elite of the Ottoman army. Accustomed to quick victories, they could not understand why they were unable to break the resistance of a handful of knights. Their losses were enormous, and they refused to go on new, senseless attacks. Mustafa Pasha completely lost control of the situation. He vacillated between rage and despair, but could no longer force his soldiers to fight with their former zeal. Discipline in the camp collapsed. Among the defenders, on the contrary, there was a sense of elation. Despite their terrible fatigue and enormous losses, they felt that the enemy had weakened. They saw the uncertainty in the Ottoman attacks and heard about the problems in their camp. Valletta skillfully maintained the morale of his men. He constantly reminded them that help from Sicily was close at hand. This hope of salvation gave them the strength to endure the last, most difficult days of the siege. The defenders learned to live under constant bombardment. The sound of a flying cannonball no longer caused panic. They became fatalists, realizing that their fate was being decided here and now. The siege turned into a psychological duel. The Ottomans lost it the moment they doubted their victory. The defenders, having nothing but faith and willpower, held out. This psychological victory was no less important than repelling the assaults. It showed that even the most powerful army is powerless if its spirit is broken. The Knights of Malta won the battle for hearts and minds before they won the battle on the walls. From the very beginning of the siege, Grandmaster Valletta sent messengers to Sicily with pleas for help. There was a Spanish fleet under the command of Viceroy Don Garcia de Toledo. However, the Viceroy was in no hurry, fearing to engage in battle with the powerful Ottoman armada. Months passed, and the promised help still did not arrive. For the defenders of Malta, this wait was almost more painful than the battles themselves. Hope gave way to despair, but they continued to believe that they had not been abandoned. Don Garcia was under tremendous pressure. On the one hand, European monarchs demanded decisive action from him. On the other hand, he was responsible for the security of Sicily and did not want to risk his fleet. Finally, in early September, Don Garcia made up his mind. He assembled an army of about 8,000 men and sailed to Malta. It was not the huge army the knights had hoped for, but they were fresh, energetic soldiers. The landing, dubbed Gran Soccorso, Great Help, was a success. Ottoman intelligence had missed the arrival of the Christian fleet. Mustafa Pasha learned of the landing of reinforcements when it was already too late. The news of the arrival of help caused panic in the Ottoman camp. The tired and demoralized soldiers, hearing that they would have to fight a fresh European army, completely lost their will to fight. They began to demand an immediate retreat. Mustafa Pasha, misjudging the size of the reinforcements, succumbed to the general panic. He ordered the siege to be lifted and preparations for evacuation to begin. The huge Ottoman army began to hastily board the ships. Upon learning of the enemy's retreat, the defenders of the fortresses could not believe their luck. After 4 months of hell, they were saved. Their incredible perseverance and sacrifices had not been in vain. However, the story did not end there. Mustafa, learning that the Christian army was not as large as he had thought, decided to return and give battle. But his soldiers no longer wanted to fight. The final battle took place on the plains of Malta. The fresh Spanish regiments easily overwhelmed the hastily assembled ranks of the exhausted Ottomans. The retreat turned into a disorderly flight. On September 13, 1565, the last Ottoman ships left Maltese waters. The Great Siege of Malta was over. It lasted almost 4 months and became one of the bloodiest campaigns of the 16th century. The consequences for the Ottoman army were catastrophic. Of the 40,000 troops, barely a quarter returned home. The best regiments, including the cream of the Janissaries, were lost, and the prestige of the Sultan's invincible army was irreparably damaged. The defenders also paid a heavy price. Almost all the knights, soldiers, and militiamen were either killed or wounded. The island was completely devastated, with towns and villages lying in ruins. But it was a victory whose significance cannot be overestimated. The heroic defense of Malta halted the expansion of the Ottoman Empire in the central Mediterranean. Suleiman's dream of complete control over the sea was shattered. News of the victory spread throughout Europe, causing widespread jubilation. The Maltese knights and their Grand Master, Jean de la Valette, became legends. They proved that even a small but determined force could stand up to a powerful empire. After the siege, donations poured in from all over Europe. With this money, La Valette began construction of a new fortress city, which was named after him, Valletta. This city became a symbol of resilience and rebirth. The Great Siege of Malta went down in history as a classic example of asymmetric warfare. It showed that the outcome of a battle is not only determined by the number of troops and the power of artillery. The most important factors were geography, the quality of fortifications, leadership, and most importantly, morale. For a small island in the Mediterranean changed the course of European history. This story teaches us that even in the most hopeless situation, we must not give up. Perseverance, courage, and faith in one's cause can work wonders. The small garrison of Malta proved this to the whole world. The Great Siege of Malta in 1565 is not just a story about a battle. It is an epic saga of courage, self-sacrifice, and the incredible power of the human spirit. The defenders' victory was the result of a combination of many factors: a brilliant defensive strategy, the unyielding will of their leader, and fatal mistakes by their opponents. The knights used every inch of their land and every feature of the terrain to compensate for the enormous imbalance in forces. They turned their island into a stone trap in which the greatest army of the time became bogged down. Their victory became a symbol that will and intellect can overcome brute force. What other great sieges or little-known battles in history would you like to see on our channel? Suggest topics in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.